The woman, holding a heavy suitcase, searched for a seat. She noticed a handsome man with an empty seat next to him. She set down her suitcase, ready to sit. Before she could settle, the driver accelerated and the bus moved forward. Startled, she felt she had accidentally sat on something protruding. Realizing something was amiss, she quickly turned to apologize to the man, forgetting she was still sitting there. The man, resigned, asked her when she planned to get up. She then came to her senses, braced herself on the man's thigh, and slid into the inner seat. After getting off, she carelessly dragged her suitcase over his foot. Changed into her uniform, she unexpectedly saw the woman again in the hotel lobby corridor. He thought to himself to avoid this harbinger of bad luck. Yet, within 2 hours, he encountered her again while delivering a cake. As the cake flew into the air, he instinctively caught the woman about to fall. The woman was deeply attracted by the handsome waiter. Their eyes met. Could this be love at first sight? At that moment, both were in a mess and quickly fled the scene. To save the hotel's reputation, the manager asked him to apologize to the guest. He rang her room bell, but no one answered. Suddenly, cries for help were heard. Driven to save her, he quickly used his room card to open the door, only to find the woman lying in a pool of blood. Without hesitation, he carried her out as the hotel contacted emergency services. However, during the medical check, she burst out laughing. She took off her clothes, put on a bathrobe, and was about to enjoy a glass of wine and a relaxing bath. However, as she stepped into the bathtub, she slipped and fell, causing a mess and pain so severe she couldn't get up. There was a knock at the door. Only then did she remember she was still in her robe. To preserve dignity, she pretended to be unconscious. The man who saw the scene thought she had attempted suicide and rushed to her aid. The woman had to awkwardly continue the act. But as the medical staff checked her reflexes, she couldn't hold back any longer. Once she regained her senses, she realized she had gone too far. She faced the wall in shame. The man, exasperated, asked what she was up to. He couldn't remember how many misunderstandings they had that day. Unknown to him, the man was flirting with another woman the day before, unnoticed by Lee Yumi. The next day, his father, Cha Jin-wook, summoned him, furious about his intimate actions with an actress publicized in the news. It just so happened to be the day Lee Yumi's mother was remarrying. During the wedding, her peak career photos were displayed, causing gossip among the guests about her questionable past. This embarrassed Lee Yumi, who angrily left the scene, only to bump into her future true love. Watching the girl who kept causing him trouble, Cha Jin-wook wanted to lose his temper. However, after hearing her stories, he couldn't bear it and took off his coat to drape it over her shoulders. Back inside, Lee Yumi decided to stop worrying about what others thought. Since she was here, she might as well take a walk. Just as she was waiting for the bus, Cha Jin-wook appeared in a sports car. Lee Yumi looked at him and tried to recall the previous day's events. Cha Jin-wook had claimed he was the prince of the resort, but Lee Yumi didn't believe him, thinking he had taken a guest's car for a joyride using his waiter's privileges. She didn't want to be an accomplice to the police, but Cha Jin-wook didn't care, and even mocked her, saying the last bus had already left. One moment she was refusing. The next, Lee Yumi had jumped into the sports car. Cha Jin-wook was smug, but they hadn't gone far when the car ran out of gas. Forced to stop at a beach, Lee Yumi had nowhere to go but to sit with Cha Jin-wook and chat awkwardly. During the conversation, Cha Jin-wook realized he didn't dislike the girl as much as before. Her naive and cheerful nature was actually quite charming. Lee Yumi vented her frustrations, and Cha Jin-wook comforted her, even complimenting how beautiful she looked when crying. Moved, Lee Yumi felt it was too late to do anything. Just as she stood to return to the hotel, Cha Jin-wook came to her rescue again. Their eyes met, and the beach at night filled with romance. Under the influence of alcohol, they began to kiss passionately. Cha Jin-wook subconsciously raised the car roof. Thus, they spent a warm night alone in the car by the beach. However, waking up the next day to see herself undressed, Lee Yumi regretted her impulsiveness. Then, hearing voices outside, she saw several women approaching and hurriedly grabbed her clothes, escaping wrapped in Cha Jin-wook's coat. They didn't even know each other's names or have time to exchange phone numbers. 3 years passed without seeing each other. Cha Jin-wook transformed into the planning director of Dafu Corporation, shedding his playboy habits but not his tsundere nature. Lee Yumi, through her efforts, graduated from culinary school and was coincidentally assigned to the Dafu Corporation's staff cafeteria. Her classmates envied her, as Dafu was the best place to work locally and full of handsome men, possibly promising a grand romance. However, on her first day at work, Cha Jin-wook recognized her from the opposite elevator. Surprised to see Lee Yumi, who had disappeared for 3 years, he quickly asked his assistant if she had seen the woman in black. The assistant, puzzled and thinking he was hallucinating from work stress, disagreed. But Cha Jin-wook was sure of what he saw, which unsettled him. Combined with his constant busyness and irregular eating habits, this stress caused him to faint during a meeting and be hospitalized. To ensure he ate on time, his assistant threatened to resign if he didn't agree to a set of rules. Lee Yumi, unexpectedly tasked with preparing Cha Jin-wook's meals, was pleased to be relied upon as a newcomer. But the head chef, jealous, harshly reprimanded her and told her it wouldn't reduce her workload in the cafeteria. To keep her job, Lee Yumi arrived at the company early. She had to prepare meals for the staff and nutritious meals for Cha Jin-wook. However, when Secretary Jang presented the breakfast to Cha Jin-wook, she scolded her, saying it looked like dog food. Lee Yumi then received a notification to remake the meal. Frustrated, but compliant. She had just finished the lunchbox after much effort. Exhausted from a hard day's work, no one even took a bite of the food. However, she wasn't discouraged, and the next day she bounced back, carefully preparing a new nutritious meal. Unexpectedly, she found the bag thrown into the trash can. Indeed, the food was discarded untouched. Her self-esteem took a serious hit. Furious, she stormed into Cha Jin-wook's office. Just then, Cha Jin-wook had returned from being busy and immediately saw Lee Yumi talking to the secretary. She was both expectant and shocked, and instinctively hid. She then pulled up Lee Yumi's resume. The plot was too dramatic. The woman who had disappeared for 3 years had become his nutritionist. This reminded him of the humiliation at the beach 3 years ago, due to Lee Yumi's sudden disappearance, which had turned him into a laughingstock among the older ladies. Thinking of this, an idea of revenge started forming in Cha Jin-wook's mind. The next day, he began to make things difficult for her. He would throw away the food if it wasn't to his liking, and refuse it if she was even a minute late. But every time, Lee Yumi would send him the menu in advance. Still, Cha Jin-wook mocked that her lunchboxes were neither nutritious nor tasty. After a back and forth, they started clashing over text messages, and Lee Yumi, losing her temper, accidentally sent him a nickname she had made up for him. She was stunned. To keep her job, she had no choice but to go and apologize. However, just as Cha Jin-wook turned around, Lee Yumi gasped in surprise. Have you ever seen such odd lovers? From meeting to establishing a relationship in less than 2 days. Yet neither knew the other's name, and they had been disconnected for 3 years. When the woman saw the man again, he had become her boss. Lee Yumi couldn't believe her eyes, but seeing his familiar and handsome face, she was too embarrassed to say anything. In the end, she fled in fear. On her way home, she kept telling herself this couldn't be true, trying to convince herself. But Cha Jin-wook blocked her path. Lee Yumi wanted to run, but couldn't escape. She had to face him, believing it wasn't real, thinking he must have mistaken her for someone else. Seeing a perplexed Lee Yumi, Cha Jin-wook pressed on, wanting to talk in his car. But with the car incident from 3 years ago in mind, Lee Yumi quickly clarified she wasn't that kind of woman, and then hurriedly ran away. But this only piqued Cha Jin-wook's interest more. Back home, Lee Yumi collapsed on the floor, recalling the scene when she first met Cha Jin-wook. Turns out he was not a waiter, and was indeed very affluent. Meanwhile, Cha Jin-wook brooded over why Lee Yumi was pretending to be clueless, since he was the kind of man no woman could refuse. Sure enough, the next day, Lee Yumi received a notice that she must deliver all 3 meals to the minister's office personally. Having no choice but to comply, but seeing Cha Jin-wook's smug expression, Lee Yumi didn't know how awkward to feel. Then Cha Jin-wook, with a mischievous smile, stood up and showed Lee Yumi the revamped proposal for the seaside resort. As she looked at the familiar pictures, she remembered the awkward scene from 3 years ago. Cha Jin-wook purposely asked her if she saw something she shouldn't have. Lee Yumi continued to feign ignorance, distractedly introducing today's nutritious meal, while Cha Jin-wook's attention was all on her face, reminding her, "From now on, we'll meet every day like today." When dinner time came, Cha Jin-wook changed his approach again. He deliberately brought out a red wine they had tasted 3 years ago and asked Lee Yumi if she wanted a glass. Lee Yumi, recalling a scene by the sea, quickly declined and mentioned she didn't drink alcohol. Seeing Lee Yumi turn to flee, he still had an unused ace up his sleeve. That evening, he suddenly pulled out a wad of cash and told Lee Yumi it was for the gasoline money he had borrowed from her that day. He then grabbed Lee Yumi's hand. Facing the man of her dreams, Lee Yumi almost lost her composure. To avoid repeating past mistakes, she requested a transfer at school. Cha Jin-wook quickly heard of this. When confronted, he justified his resignation by citing a salary that did not match his workload and slammed the table. Deciding to quit, he no longer felt the need to be submissive and boldly clarified everything. However, he was unaware that Cha Jin-wook cared not for these issues, but was concerned why Lee Yumi left without saying goodbye. Lee Yumi's answer was that she had done the wrong thing at the wrong time, which deeply hurt Cha Jin-wook. After leaving the office, Lee Yumi sat on the ground, filled with regret, not worried about other consequences, but feeling that even if she didn't resign, she would likely be fired the next day. Surprisingly, the next day, an assistant urged Lee Yumi to prepare meals and praised her delicious lunchbox, encouraging her to continue excelling, clearly conveying Cha Jin-wook's sentiments. Touched, Lee Yumi was delivering her newly cooked dishes to the office when she coincidentally saw a popular online figure getting along well with Cha Jin-wook. Her mood instantly cooled, although Cha Jin-wook insisted she bring in the lunch. Comparing herself with the well-dressed woman and her own disheveled appearance made Lee Yumi feel inferior. Distracted on her way home, she didn't know what to expect, but was grateful not to have been fired. Wondering if she could still aspire to better things, she was shocked when the woman showed up uninvited the next day, asking Lee Yumi to carry a large box. In the cafeteria, the woman boasted about her fresh ingredients and luxurious dinnerware, declaring she would personally prepare meals for her brother from now on. Lee Yumi felt uneasy since it was her job, but the woman claimed Lee Yumi's cooking was often rejected for not meeting her brother's tastes. When Lee Yumi questioned why the woman was taking her job, she arrogantly explained it was preparation for her upcoming marriage to her brother. Hearing this, Cha Jin-wook entered, dismissed the woman's claims, and pulled Lee Yumi into a tight embrace in front of her, always thinking of her. Unexpectedly, Lee Yumi regarded him as just a romantic fling. Feeling hollow, he could only drown his sorrows in alcohol with his assistant. Despite their brief past, he had not dated any women for 3 years, hoping to reconnect with Lee Yumi one day. However, in Lee Yumi's eyes, this meant nothing. Yet how could Lee Yumi not like Cha Jin-wook? Her timid nature since childhood meant she never had the courage to confess her feelings to someone from a different social standing. A strong rival appeared unexpectedly, making Lee Yumi feel her affections were delusional. However, as this woman boasted in the cafeteria, Cha Jin-wook made a timely entrance. In front of everyone, he told the influencer he would only eat meals made by Lee Yumi and would not allow others to interfere with her. Ignoring the spectators, he took Lee Yumi by the hand and walked outside. Colleagues, sensing drama, eagerly awaited developments while the influencer clenched her fists in humiliation. Cha Jin-wook led Lee Yumi into the lobby, reminding her to quickly change out of her work clothes. It turned out the boss wanted to take her out for a meal. The plot twist both shocked and delighted Lee Yumi, but Cha Jin-wook cautioned her not to overthink. He brought her here because her cooking was terrible, and he wanted her to taste the food so she could improve her own cooking for him. Lee Yumi suspected he was teasing and repeatedly asked if he was dating the influencer. Cha Jin-wook clarified they were just like siblings, advising her not to speculate wildly. Satisfied with his response, Lee Yumi boldly asked what he meant by saying he would only eat her cooking. Cha Jin-wook dismissed it, stating she was his nutritionist and the company hired her to cook for him. However, Lee Yumi believed there was more to his words. At that moment, Cha Jin-wook seriously told Lee Yumi that his cold response was like a splash of cold water, quashing the slight hope that had just ignited. Listening to the boss lecture, Lee Yumi felt lost and walked into a glass door. Unexpectedly, Cha Jin-wook caught her in his arms just in time. This familiar feeling confused Lee Yumi, leaving her unsure of his feelings towards her, known only to Cha Jin-wook himself. He had waited 3 years, and did not want to let Lee Yumi off easily. The real challenge was just beginning. He mysteriously opened a box, having exhausted all schemes to win back Lee Yumi, who had been missing for 3 years. Despite just having a big meal, Cha Jin-wook claimed he was still hungry and called Lee Yumi, who was on her day off. Confused, he wondered how Lee Yumi could have a child. She quickly corrected that she had just woken up and mistook him for her mother, hence calling him Mom. Surprised by his urgency, Cha Jin-wook demanded Lee Yumi come to his house immediately to cook for him. With no one to watch her 3-year-old brother, Lee Yumi had no choice but to bring him along to Cha Jin-wook's 2,000 square meter mansion. Upon entering, she was stunned to find that such a wealthy young master also slept on a sofa. Driven by curiosity, she explored every room, only to find them all empty and bedless. To avoid disturbances, she let her brother stay in the study while she enjoyed making bento boxes. The Michelin bento was soon ready. However, sounds of destruction came from upstairs. Lee Yumi had a bad feeling and ran up to find her brother had smashed a beautiful jewelry box on the floor. This was a disaster, especially considering the exquisite box was likely irreplaceable, even if she sold herself. She wanted to check if the contents were damaged, but then thought better of it, respecting Cha Jin-wook's privacy. Opting for a strategic retreat, she left, just as Cha Jin-wook returned excitedly, having bought coffee for her. He entered only to find her absence, noticing just the bento and a sticky note on the table. As he turned to follow her, he tripped over a bag at the door. Inside, he found a coat Lee Yumi had borrowed 3 years ago. Despite enjoying the delicious bento, Cha Jin-wook felt lonely and upset, especially seeing the coat he thought was discarded. He angrily poured away the coffee he bought for her. Meanwhile, Lee Yumi was still worried about confessing to breaking the box. To make amends, she prepared an adorable bento for Cha Jin-wook, but he accused her of having ulterior motives. Believing he discovered the broken box, she was about to confess when he mentioned the coat, convinced she still cared for him. Lee Yumi was still concerned about compensating for the box as she cautiously left the office, only to encounter Ju Hyeri in the lobby. Ju Hyeri, who had brought a bento to win favors through Cha Jin-wook's father, warned Lee Yumi to stay away. Back at his mansion, Cha Jin-wook sensed something amiss as the jewelry box had been tampered with, suspecting only Lee Yumi. 3 years ago, the naive and charming Lee Yumi met the wealthy and handsome Cha Jin-wook by the sea but then vanished. The only memento he had was an item she left in his car. When questioned, Lee Yumi nervously offered a prepared treasure box, but Cha Jin-wook, unconvinced, pressed her about the jewelry box. Despite her calm lies, he grew angry, which attracted the attention of a handsome friend ready to defend her. However, this friend was just her childhood buddy, causing Cha Jin-wook to brood. To avoid trouble for her friend, Lee Yumi claimed it was her own issue and left. Jealous, Cha Jin-wook admired the cute bento, took pictures and canceled his plans, causing Lee Yumi to stay late at work. Lee Yumi has to continue making dinner for Cha Jin-wook until she can finally leave work. But Cha Jin-wook hears someone is coming to pick him up to cause trouble. He insists, despite his reluctance, that Lee Yumi make another bowl of ramen. After finishing, he demands that Lee Yumi wait until he has eaten. Seeing her anxious expression, Cha Jin-wook asks if she has a date. Lee Yumi does not respond, so he moves closer. Nervous, Lee Yumi uncontrollably burps, recalling that she always burps when they get close. Cha Jin-wook boldly thinks this means she has feelings for him. However, Lee Yumi pushes him away, saying his presence makes her uncomfortable, and the burping is just a self-defense mechanism. Although Lee Yumi narrowly escapes this time, Cha Jin-wook is not ready to let her go. Today, her opportunity finally arrives. My goodness, not even a delivery guy is as dedicated as her. For her boss's request, she has to prepare 10 work meals alone and deliver them to the interview room by noon. The person who ordered this is Cha Jin-wook, who is being interviewed today. Fortunately, Lee Yumi, efficient as ever, completes the task flawlessly. Cha Jin-wook wanted Lee Yumi to impress in front of Ju Hyeri, but instead, he deliberately orders fancy takeout and lets the crew choose. The crew obviously knows which is more upscale, so no one picks Lee Yumi's bento, leading to an awkward situation. Ju Hyeri hypocritically scolds herself, saying she forgot her brother also prepared lunch. Cha Jin-wook knows he is messing with Lee Yumi, but with the place crowded, he doesn't bother arguing with Ju Hyeri. Instead, he quickly follows Lee Yumi. He fears she might misunderstand, and tries to explain that this was not his arrangement. Lee Yumi, however, apologizes because she thinks the whole situation is because of the jewelry box, assuming it contains a proposal gift from Cha Jin-wook to Joo Hee-ri. After Lee Yumi leaves, Cha Jin-wook realizes she doesn't know that the box actually contains a breast pin he lost 3 years ago. A heartbroken Lee Yumi runs to the restroom, tells herself not to cry or let Cha Jin-wook see her feelings. She just returns to work when she receives a call from Assistant Jang, telling her to rush to the hospital because Cha Jin-wook has been admitted. She hurries there and finds Cha Jin-wook immobile in bed. According to Jang, the minister ate all 10 bento boxes alone not to waste Lee Yumi's hard work. Cha Jin-wook didn't want to see Lee Yumi upset, which landed him in the hospital. Knowing the truth, Lee Yumi feels both distressed and guilty, but doesn't know what to say. An exhausted Cha Jin-wook still cares about why she didn't go on a date with her boyfriend. Lee Yumi finally tells the truth, saying it was just her childhood friend backing her up. Hearing this, Cha Jin-wook feels like he's received a shot of adrenaline. He immediately turned his head and took the opportunity to tell Lee Yumi that he had no relationship with Joo Hee-ri, and the jewelry box was intended for someone else. However, he had taken a sleeping pill given by Assistant Jang earlier and fell asleep before he could reveal the owner's name. Looking closely, he lay motionless on the hospital bed, and at that moment, Lee Yumi boldly stole a kiss. She was later admitted to the hospital for her boldness. Watching Cha Jin-wook asleep, Lee Yumi decided to stay and keep him company. She tried to cover him with a blanket, but in his sleep, he grabbed her hand and pulled her close to him. Looking at the man she deeply loved, Lee Yumi couldn't help herself. The next day, they were discharged from the hospital. Cha Jin-wook, recalling his dream, vaguely felt that Lee Yumi had kissed him. So, back at the company, he canceled all his work, eager to see Lee Yumi sooner. However, when Lee Yumi arrived, he pretended to still be sick and insisted that she take responsibility. Lee Yumi was flustered, but Cha Jin-wook had already moved behind her, blocking her way and stating that her actions had led him to the hospital, and as compensation, she must join him for 10 meals unconditionally. Knowing she was cornered but unable to refuse, she resigned herself to his whims. After work, Cha Jin-wook immediately put his plan into action, meeting Lee Yumi at the company entrance. As soon as they got into the car, Lee Yumi stressed that this was not a date, just part of her job. Being a nutritionist, she insisted on deciding where they would eat. Cha Jin-wook agreed verbally, but secretly performed a drift, causing an unprepared Lee Yumi to land on his lap. He was startled and unconsciously put up barriers, realizing how deep his schemes ran and fearing she might eventually be overwhelmed by his antics. Thus, they embarked on their first date after 3 years. But Lee Yumi chose a simple and cheap roadside diner. Accustomed to Michelin-starred meals, Cha Jin-wook was not impressed. Watching Lee Yumi enjoy her loach soup, he reluctantly tried it and discovered a new world of flavors. He followed Lee Yumi's lead and mixed his rice into the soup, but accidentally splashed some on his white shirt because he had previously refused to wear an apron. Lee Yumi hurriedly helped him clean up with a napkin, but he teased her for taking advantage of him, even though he was secretly delighted. The sweet dinner ended on this playful note. Lee Yumi packed some loach soup to go. Cha Jin-wook felt jealous, thinking she was taking it for an old friend. However, Lee Yumi explained it was for her mother, who hadn't eaten yet. Relieved, Cha Jin-wook felt satisfied. But the next day, a Saturday, he demanded Lee Yumi work on her day off. She reluctantly agreed after his persistent persuasion. Jang Woo-jin looked on, disappointed, sensing something. To date his girlfriend, the overbearing CEO dressed sharply, turning heads. Yet, he had never been to a couple's restaurant and was surprised to see it so busy. He felt he shouldn't have to queue because of his status. So, he confidently pulled out his business card. The manager ignored him and pointed to a box for self-service. He tried to bribe the manager but was disdainfully rejected. The manager pointed to the queue sign and told him to wait his turn. Angry, Cha Jin-wook made a scene. Lee Yumi arrived, rushed to stop him, and apologized as she pulled him away embarrassed. Hearing Lee Yumi call him embarrassing, Cha Jin-wook was dismissive. She explained that people queue early to date someone they like and wouldn't appreciate queue jumpers. Cha Jin-wook felt embarrassed, but warmed by the idea of a date. When their turn came, he excitedly took Lee Yumi's hand. She felt butterflies as they happily had lunch by the window. They then strolled together, and Cha Jin-wook noticed Lee Yumi's shoelace was undone. He sat her down to tie it, making her feel warm inside. On the way back, she fondly recalled her time with Cha Jin-wook, feeling like this was love. The next day, Lee Yumi was no longer timid and asked to stay for dinner. However, both felt awkward this time. To ease the tension, he suggested they dine together. But Lee Yumi had already eaten. To spend more time together, he canceled her lunch-making duties and booked dinner. Lee Yumi, asserting her schedule, said she was busy tonight and asked for notice for future dates. The CEO nodded in agreement, not knowing Lee Yumi was just teasing. This backfired, making Lee Yumi the passive one. To change the situation, she invited Cha Jin-wook to dinner. He immediately smiled, grabbed his coat, and ran out of the office. But this time, Lee Yumi felt like she had done something wrong. He was careful with every move, afraid of being seen. He asked Cha Jin-wook where they were going for dinner, but Cha Jin-wook had already canceled the restaurant reservation. They ended up at his place, pulling Lee Yumi along. Lee Yumi panicked. It was late at night, and she didn't know what to expect at his house. A man's first home date can be quite intimidating for a woman. Lee Yumi thought Cha Jin-wook was going to make a move, so she shyly closed her eyes. However, he was only turning off the light, leaving her slightly disappointed. But soon, Cha Jin-wook handed her 2 plates, cautioning her to hold them carefully. The sweet appetizer caught Lee Yumi off guard, while Cha Jin-wook calmly carried the plates to the opposite side, leaving her standing there, stunned. Cha Jin-wook might seem experienced in love, but he was actually very nervous. His ears even turned red. Still, he tried to stay calm, cutting the steak and bringing it to Lee Yumi's mouth. But a sudden doorbell ruined the intimate atmosphere. It was the chairman checking in unexpectedly. Both were startled. Lee Yumi quickly hid upstairs. Cha Jin-wook thought the coast was clear, but the 2 servings of steak on the table made his father suspect that his son was hiding a woman. At that moment, Lee Yumi was nervously unsure where to hide. Then, a broken jewelry box appeared. Driven by curiosity, she opened it and was shocked to find her own nipple cover inside. In her panic, the box fell to the floor, confirming the chairman's suspicion. He forcefully went upstairs to check, but didn't find Lee Yumi, who had hidden in the wardrobe. A timely appearance by a little black cat took the blame, averting the crisis. Cha Jin-wook finally managed to send his father away, but the unaware Lee Yumi was too scared to come out from the wardrobe. Suddenly, there was a noise inside. After a heart-stopping moment, Lee Yumi didn't dare stay any longer and took the bus home. She recalled a scene from 3 years ago when she rushed out and realized on the taxi that she was missing a nipple cover. She thought she had lost it due to carelessness. Realizing how much he cared made her feel incredibly sweet. However, when the chairman returned, he felt something was off. He suspected his son was hiding someone and called his secretary to investigate further. Meanwhile, Lee Yumi was sweetly daydreaming, only to be startled by Cha Jin-wook. As a punishment for not fulfilling her dinner duties, he asked her to accompany him on a 3-week business trip to serve as a special nutritionist for a foreign client. But he certainly had his own motives. Lee Yumi felt like she was walking into a trap, yet she still showed up the next day in a smart suit. Watching the elegant Lee Yumi, Cha Jin-wook couldn't help but admire her. It was still the same car from 3 years ago, but upon reaching his destination, Lee Yumi faced an embarrassing moment. Because this was the resort where they met 3 years ago, she suddenly had a bad feeling. She turned to run, but was forcefully pulled in by Cha Jin-wook, and she was dragged into the hotel by Cha Jin-wook. Fortunately, the work went smoothly, and the client praised Lee Yumi's lunch highly. After a busy day, Lee Yumi could finally rest on the sofa. But just as she was about to relax, the doorbell rang. Thinking it was Cha Jin-wook, she excitedly opened the door, only to find no one there but a gift box on the ground. Inside, there was a pair of elegant high heels and a beautiful evening gown with a note from Cha Jin-wook. When Cha Jin-wook saw Lee Yumi again, it was like Cinderella in her glass slippers, approaching with a smile, each step filled with romance. However, the beauty lasted only 3 seconds before a waiter accidentally spilled red wine on Lee Yumi. Luckily, Cha Jin-wook swiftly caught her, but the new evening gown was ruined. Lee Yumi knew Cha Jin-wook would blame her, thinking she'd have to eat more meals with him, but Cha Jin-wook said even 10 meals wouldn't cover the cost of the gown. Lee Yumi was about to argue when the hotel manager came over with the waiter to apologize. The same manager who had asked Cha Jin-wook to apologize to Lee Yumi seemed to take some pleasure in the situation. even patting the manager on the shoulder, waiting to see his embarrassment. Yet the manager, dignified, signaled that as the planning department head of Defu Group, Cha Jin-wook should also apologize for his staff's mistake. Cha Jin-wook had no choice but to bow an apology to Lee Yumi in front of the manager and staff. Lee Yumi was delighted by the situation and didn't forget to compliment the manager. To show sincerity, the manager gifted Lee Yumi a bottle of fine red wine and gave Cha Jin-wook a meaningful glance, wishing them a happy time together. The two sat on the rooftop, savoring the taste of the red wine from 3 years ago. Cha Jin-wook also reminisced about their happy first night and began to confess his feelings to Lee Yumi. But Lee Yumi regretted what happened that day. The man extended his right hand, hoping she would pull him up, but instead, he dragged both of them into the pool. Lee Yumi couldn't swim and scolded him for pulling her into the water. Just after saying this, Lee Yumi began hiccuping non-stop. After being embarrassed by Cha Jin-wook, she had no choice but to go change her clothes. Looking back, Lee Yumi suddenly noticed Cha Jin-wook motionless in the water. Panicking, she didn't think twice and jumped in, pinching her nose. She dragged Cha Jin-wook towards the shore. Fortunately, 2 employees heard the commotion and helped pull him out. However, Cha Jin-wook was only pretending and was secretly signaling to one of them. The employee, understanding the boss's intent, quickly left with his colleague, leaving Lee Yumi almost frantic. She thought Cha Jin-wook was in trouble and blurted out her true feelings. Hearing the answer he wanted, Cha Jin-wook couldn't keep up the act. Although a bit mean, the trick worked effectively. Afterwards, they sat by the pool and talked. Lee Yumi expressed her feelings because of Cha Jin-wook's prank. Although keeping a chest patch as a treasure seemed bizarre, Cha Jin-wook could only blame Lee Yumi for his longing, caused by her sudden departure. This confession made Lee Yumi both sweet and touched, prompting her to kiss his cheek spontaneously. Cha Jin-wook accompanied Lee Yumi back to her room but hesitated to leave. He blocked the door, making up reasons to stay. However, Lee Yumi just smiled and eventually locked him out, leaving him disappointed. Even though the business trip was over, they started texting heavily the next day at work. Cha Jin-wook wanted to invite Lee Yumi to dinner, but she said her family dog was having a birthday. To Cha Jin-wook's surprise, he saw Lee Yumi's childhood friend picking her up after work. Jealous, he brought a bag of dog food as a gift uninvited. Even Lee Yumi's mother found it strange to bring dog food for a birthday. It turned out the little dog celebrating a birthday was her 3-year-old brother, Dong-gu. Embarrassed, Lee Yumi made an excuse for her mother to take her brother to bed. Soon, only 2 men and 1 woman remained at the table. The rivalry intensified, and the conversation was tense. To ease the tension, Lee Yumi kept offering drinks. After several rounds, the childhood friend passed out drunk. Cha Jin-wook, finding Lee Yumi increasingly adorable, hugged her but fell asleep before he could kiss her. By the time he woke up, it was the next day. Lee Yumi had gone to work, and his mother had urgent matters, leaving Cha Jin-wook to care for Dong-gu. He proved to be a competent temporary caregiver, and Dong-gu enjoyed playing with him. As they passed neighbors, women commented on his good looks and charm, even while pushing a swing. The scene looked as though a father was with his son. This was witnessed by the passing father, Chairman Cha, who was puzzled. He wondered whose child his son was accompanying, thinking if his son had a child behind his back. Meanwhile, the mother's gossip also puzzled Cha Jin-wook. They all said Dong-gu looked exactly like his father. Cha Jin-wook wanted to explain, but hesitated as Dong-gu kept pulling on his ear, so he ignored it. After bathing Dong-gu at home, he curiously asked about the child's age. Dong-gu held up 3 fingers, revealing he was 3 years old. This number made Cha Jin-wook think of Lee Yumi, who he had lost contact with 3 years ago. Lee Yumi felt embarrassed upon returning home, and seeing her mother had let Cha Jin-wook care for her brother. However, Cha Jin-wook didn't mind, and was more concerned about whose child Dong-gu was. Lee Yumi hesitantly answered, saying her mother brought him home, and now they live together. Before leaving, Cha Jin-wook complained about how tiring it was to look after children and secretly kissed Lee Yumi, leaving her blushing but satisfied. However, Cha Jin-wook didn't know that Chairman Dad was waiting to interrogate him, as he had found out about Lee Yumi's identity and confronted him with a photo of Lee Yumi and him from 3 years ago, questioning if the child was theirs. Confused, Cha Jin-wook searched his memory for clues. He suddenly realized Lee Yumi always acted evasively when mentioning Donggu, and remembered the child's age, leading to a bold idea. He immediately arranged to meet Lee Yumi after work. This encounter was seen by Ju Hae-ri, who was furious to see the kitchen maid getting into Cha Jin-wook's car and followed them. The childhood friend who came to pick up Lee Yumi saw this too. Thus, 2 cars and a motorcycle began a high-speed chase. Lee Yumi, unaware of her mistake, noticed Cha Jin-wook looking stern and asking if she was hiding something. They stopped on the roadside and he demanded she tell him everything that happened after she left 3 years ago. Lee Yumi didn't understand his sudden questioning, but his anxious expression added pressure. She had to get out of the car and run. Cha Jin-wook quickly followed and told Lee Yumi that he had been restless for 3 years, using work to numb himself, and now he wanted to know her true experiences and thoughts. Moved by Cha Jin-wook's heartfelt confession, Lee Yumi finally shared her true feelings. She said she was evasive because she feared Cha Jin-wook would think her frivolous, believing that a one-night stand couldn't lead to anything. But for Lee Yumi, Cha Jin-wook was the only man in her life in such a situation. Hearing this, Cha Jin-wook felt both pained and guilty, and could only embrace Lee Yumi to soothe her distress. Ju Hae-ri, who had followed them, saw everything and was furious. She wanted to confront them but was pulled away by Lee Yumi's childhood friend. Not understanding the man's thoughts and why he liked Lee Yumi but couldn't express it, she decided to go back and gather evidence to ruin Lee Yumi. This drama always puzzled me. Why such a handsome son has such an ordinary-looking father? Cha Jin-wook, though owning a vast fortune, lost his mother's love at a young age when she left home, to give her family a complete life. He immediately ordered a dedicated office for Lee Yumi. But why would a kitchen maid need an office? This caused co-workers to suspect they were dating. Cha Jin-wook seized the moment and even had Lee Yumi take Donggu out for fun. It was supposed to be a sweet date for 2, but Cha Jin-wook focused on getting close to Donggu, leaving Lee Yumi out like an extra. Realizing something was off, Cha Jin-wook quickly brought Lee Yumi over, and they truly experienced the warmth of a family of 3. However, when the 3 were eating ice cream, Cha Jin-wook again left Lee Yumi out, carefully feeding Donggu. Lee Yumi immediately felt a pang of jealousy. Cha Jin-wook asked her what was wrong, to which she said it felt like a date between 2 men, and she was just an unwanted third wheel. Cha Jin-wook found it both annoying and funny, assuring her that in the future, he wouldn't struggle alone. He playfully cheered Lee Yumi up after their day out. At the end of the date, Cha Jin-wook presented a gift, not for Lee Yumi, but for Donggu, emphasizing it was a father-son matching underwear set, which embarrassed Lee Yumi a bit. He suggested Lee Yumi bring Donggu to his house next week. Hearing she had to bring the child again, Lee Yumi awkwardly gritted her teeth. She couldn't believe how much Cha Jin-wook liked children, but he clarified it wasn't just about Donggu. It was because they were family with Lee Yumi. Despite her Cinderella-like experiences these days, Lee Yumi was happy yet felt it surreal. A childhood friend cautiously asked her, "Your backgrounds are so different, is this really okay?" But recalling Cha Jin-wook's sincere confession during the day, Lee Yumi felt confident about their future, though her friend pined for her happiness, struggling with his own feelings for her. While taking out the trash, Lee Yumi encountered a drunken Ju Hae-ri, who, despite being disliked, couldn't be ignored by kind-hearted Lee Yumi. Ju Hae-ri, unrestrained, blamed Lee Yumi for ruining her life, calling her shameless like her actress mother, and even dreaming of turning her life around with a one-night stand. Her words were sharp, deeply hurting Lee Yumi, mocking Cha Jin-wook for falling for such a frivolous woman, despite chasing him for 12 years, unable to believe her youth was less significant than their absurd night. As a child read a comic book at a table, an old man surreptitiously approached, scanning for onlookers before attempting to pull the child's hair. Just as he was about to succeed, he was stopped by an angry aunt who, deeming him suspicious, confronted him about touching the child. The old man arrogantly dismissed her concerns, leading to a loud argument. The aunt had the waiter take the child upstairs. Hearing the commotion, Lee Yumi came down and discovered the man arguing with her mother was Cha Jin-wook's father. With the parties involved present, Chairman Cha told Lee Yumi he was there to confirm if the child was Cha Jin-wook's. Confused, Lee Yumi awaited an explanation when Cha Jin-wook arrived, asking his father what mess he was creating. He blamed his father for his procrastination, forcing him to intervene personally. Lee Yumi, clueless about the situation, was just about to get an answer when her mother objected. He didn't know what the father and son were thinking. How did the son he had after 10 months of pregnancy become theirs? Hearing this, President Cha was utterly confused, but he felt that Lee Yumi's mother was taking the blame for her. He wanted to hear the truth from Lee Yumi. Feeling helpless and speechless, Lee Yumi had already said that Donggu was a child her mother brought home, her half-brother from the same mother, but different father. Upon learning the truth, Cha Jin-wook deflated like a punctured ball, questioning himself about what he was really doing. Lee Yumi sensed something was off and figured out Cha Jin-wook's thoughts. It turned out his kindness towards her all this time was because he mistakenly thought Donggu was his son. At a loss for words, Cha Jin-wook remained silent and head down. However, their conversation was interrupted by Chairman Cha, who had longed for a grandson to no avail. He wanted to call Cha Jin-wook back, but Cha Jin-wook wanted to talk more with Lee Yumi, who by then was disheartened and turned to leave him standing there. In the company, Chairman Cha slammed the table in fury, even questioning his son's values over a daughter of an erotic actress, abandoning the distinguished Ju Hae-ri. He angrily warned that he would make Lee Yumi disappear from before Cha Jin-wook, who openly defied his father, asserting he was no longer the child who could only watch his mother leave. Chairman Cha dared not act rashly on the spot. However, the situation escalated when Ju Hae-ri lost control of her emotions on a live show and cried publicly, sparking rumors online. People speculated she was dumped by Cha Jin-wook and wanted to see his joke. Meanwhile, some netizens revealed that Cha Jin-wook did not actually like Ju Hae-ri, but was secretly dating the company cafeteria's nutritionist. This led to speculation about how attractive Lee Yumi must be to take away Ju Hae-ri's love. Even Lee Yumi's brother was rumored to be her and Cha Jin-wook's illegitimate child. The tranquil life was shattered, forcing Lee Yumi to wake up from her Cinderella dream. Using her position as a nutritionist, she frequently visited the corporate headquarters and, with her sweet looks, captured the heart of the famous news anchor, Cha Jin-wook. The internet, once a place for free and fair expression, now became a tool for venting personal grievances. The victims were undoubtedly the exposed Lee Yumi and Cha Jin-wook, whose public image was threatened. Now, the streets were abuzz with their story, and everyone was eager to know what Lee Yumi really looked like. Seeing Lee Yumi silent, Cha Jin-wook felt a mix of emotions and wanted to comfort her, but was warned by old Zhang that such times were exactly when the media could exploit them. As childhood friends, they pondered whether a mismatched match could really work. Lee Yumi consoled herself optimistically. Though it was her first love, it need not be so dramatic. The next day they acted like strangers at the company, but being in such a public place only added to the trouble. Thus, they agreed to meet that evening. With tears, Lee Yumi thanked Cha Jin-wook for his care over time. She had already applied to transfer from Depicts Group. Although Cha Jin-wook was puzzled, Lee Yumi was resolute, not seeking his opinion but having made up her mind, decisively got out of the car, leaving a heartbroken Cha Jin-wook sitting inside. Lee Yumi couldn't bear the thought of Cha Jin-wook being criticized because of her, although she just didn't want him to suffer. Assistant Lao Zhang, still caring for Cha Jin-wook, informed him of Lee Yumi's new address. It was a distant university cafeteria, which demanded far more labor compared to the corporate restaurant. This made it tough for Lee Yumi to manage. Whenever she saw posters of the seaside resort, she would inadvertently recall a day's work with Cha Jin-wook and hoped for a message from him, even a simple greeting. However, she received a message from an old friend instead. In this unfamiliar environment, the visit from a friend brought a touch of warmth, but despite their long conversation, the friend could tell Lee Yumi was still not over Cha Jin-wook. Realizing they had ended, he gathered the courage to confess his feelings to Lee Yumi, admitting he didn't know when he started liking her. It might have been too late. Otherwise, he might have won her heart. Seeing the sadness on his usually cheerful friend's face, Lee Yumi couldn't help but hug him. However, she could only apologize, as her heart had room only for Cha Jin-wook. But the friend accidentally spotted Cha Jin-wook nearby. Cha Jin-wook, without telling Lee Yumi, left with a complex expression. As an observer, you would surely be anxious for them. At a critical moment, Lee Yumi's mother, wanting to stir up more attention, revealed her daughter's relationship with Cha Jin-wook on live TV, and exaggerated a story about her son being mistaken for a grandson. This threw Lee Yumi back into a situation where she was mocked by everyone. Amidst adjusting to her role at the school, Lee Yumi became the center of attention again. Cornered by the pointing of students, she was pushed to the brink. Cha Jin-wook, after seeing the video, received a call from his father, but assistant Lao Zhang took the phone, encouraging Cha Jin-wook not to miss out on his happiness due to others' opinions. Motivated, Cha Jin-wook headed straight to Lee Yumi's school, only to find she had already left. Her phone was turned off, leaving Cha Jin-wook overwhelmed with emotions. He rushed to her home, where her angry friend punched him, blaming him for Lee Yumi's public humiliation. Realizing his fault, Cha Jin-wook begged to know Lee Yumi's whereabouts. The friend, knowing the situation, told him that Lee Yumi had gone to the seaside where they first fell in love, but warned him not to hurt her again. Meanwhile, Lee Yumi, already at the beach, was splashed by a restaurant owner, who blamed him for not watching his path. Fortunately, a kind-hearted lady invited the unfortunate Lee Yumi into her shop to dry his clothes and offered him freshly cooked abalone porridge, which Lee Yumi found exceptionally delicious. Due to professional habits, she asked the aunt for the recipe. The aunt was surprised that Lee Yumi was so interested in abalone porridge. Upon asking, she found out that he was a nutritionist. Lee Yumi then remembered what Cha Jin-wook had once said. He loved his mother's abalone porridge the most, but restaurants couldn't replicate its taste. Now that she had the recipe, even if she learned to cook it, she would never have the chance to make it for Cha Jin-wook again. Seeing Lee Yumi's disappointed look, the aunt let her ride her bicycle to clear her mind. Meanwhile, Cha Jin-wook spotted her. When he approached, he realized he had mistaken someone else for her due to his longing. She left empty-handed and continued her search by car, unknowingly passing by Lee Yumi on her bicycle. Unaware, Lee Yumi had ridden to the beach where she had first met Cha Jin-wook. Looking at the blue sea, she recalled their past moments. Nearby, Cha Jin-wook was remembering how Lee Yumi looked when she found a coin. Just then, Lee Yumi found another coin on the roadside, but it slipped out of her hands. She chased it, only for a man to stop it with his foot. Looking up, she saw Cha Jin-wook. The familiar face was tearful. They embraced again, reliving the warmth of 3 years ago. She slept in the car, slowly waking up to what she felt was a wishful dream, wanting only to preserve this beautiful memory for Cha Jin-wook. Despite her reluctance, she left him alone in the car, crying. Overwhelmed by public scrutiny, Lee Yumi couldn't bear it and didn't want Cha Jin-wook to get hurt. Perhaps breaking up was best. Cha Jin-wook struggled to let go until dawn, staring at the empty seat beside him, waiting 3 years for the Lee Yumi he met without even knowing her name. Holding his belief, he was ready to wait 30 more years as long as his intentions remained true. He believed Lee Yumi would return any moment. When he drove back to his mother's porridge shop, he saw Lee Yumi's bicycle parked outside. This gave him courage to enter the place he had hesitated to approach for years. After a long time, he finally saw his long-yearned-for mother. Tears welled up in her eyes seeing her son. They sat at the dining table, and she made his favorite abalone porridge. Watching him eat and cry, his mother, touched, told Cha Jin-wook that the girl had visited yesterday and truly loved him. She hoped her son would bravely face love and not live in regret due to others' opinions. Lee Yumi's mother, realizing her own foolishness and how much pressure her daughter faced, sought to make amends. Through a live show, she told Lee Yumi that love knows no bounds of age, status, or identity, and not to hesitate because of others' words. One-night stands didn't matter as long as there was love. Despite being an offbeat mother, her words were heartfelt. Even Lee Yumi's childhood friend stepped in, lending her his motorcycle. Receiving a message from Lee Yumi wanting to visit the company made Cha Jin-wook very happy. He couldn't wait a second longer and got out of the traffic jam to run to the company. Just then, his dad called. He decided to tell him outright that he would give up everything he has rather than give up on Lee Yumi. Missing her would mean regretting it for the rest of his life. He ran all the way, sprinting towards his love, and finally heard Lee Yumi's shouts as he arrived at the company. With a look of grievance, he opened his arms to Lee Yumi, who rushed into his embrace. Their sweetness once again drew an audience, but this time they were sincerely blessed. From then on, their scandal resolved itself, and their secret relationship became public. From meeting to knowing each other, From the beginning of their connection to its fulfillment, although it took 3 long years, it was indeed an anxious romance.